Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. I get quite excited when I talk, so apologies if I speak quite quickly. This is one of the easiest talks to give because the message is very positive and very hopeful. And not only is street art beautiful, but some of the things that are happening, there's a sense of inevitability of our cities becoming more painted, which is the story I'm going to go through with you guys today. So how street art offers new possibilities for our cities. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, my background, the organization that we run, Global Street Art. I'll give you a very quick history of street art, and then we'll spend the bulk of this talk talking about 3 different ways in which you can look at street art. What's changed within the art form itself, what's changed in advertising, and what's changing in terms of public space. So, I have a very weird background. On the one hand, I was a scientist. I have a PhD in maths and evolution. And on the other hand, I used to breakdance for the UK. I was always interested in lots of different things. In a competition many years ago, I tore my knee. This was about 10 years ago, and I had to stop dancing overnight. All of that kind of nervous energy needed to be applied somewhere, so it became applied to photography. After science, I moved into finance and then insurance. I spent some time living in Spain, where I really picked up my camera, and every weekend I'd sneak off to a new city and just record as much art as possible. I preferred art a lot more to insurance, and by that time we had an investor, and he funded my ability to travel to different countries and take photos of street art. I ended up taking 60,000 photos of street art, and my mind by that point was somewhat expanded. But like all good scientists would, I wanted to know more about the art that I was photographing. So I started classifying it religiously, by artist, by technique, by location. And we were able to pick out some really funny and silly things from the database, including things like smoking monkeys. Fast forward a little bit to where we are today. Global Street Art was then founded in 2012. It's an online platform with artists who've signed up from over 90 countries, have 160,000 fans on social media, and we share the work of artists with our fans and help promote them online. One of the things that people know us for is our platform has been extended to the real world. Since 2012, we've organized over 700 legal street art murals in London. We're responsible for a little over half of the bigger bits of street art, the significant stuff in the Brick Lane area. We don't mark any of the walls, so you wouldn't know we exist, but we don't paint. We just provide a space for artists to do so. And we're currently looking after what I think is the biggest or second biggest street art spot in London. It's around 2 large building sites on Great Eastern Street. We also work with organizations, commercial companies, to do bespoke, hand-painted advertising. I'll show you guys some examples of all of those things. So that's our website. You can pop on there. There's some beautiful art. Some of the walls that we've arranged in the last few years, including in East London, Hackney Wick, the South Bank Centre, Sydenham, etc., etc. And we have a book out, book Concrete Canvas. The launch party is actually next week. You're all invited. And it came out just a couple of weeks ago on Amazon. So painting walls is not something new. We've been doing it for a long time. I'm going to show you some beautiful examples of ancient Egyptian graffiti, and indeed, even the cavemen were painting. So we've been painting walls a lot since sort of caveman times. But this is something that's being kind of reimagined and repurposed today. So to give you the quick history of street art and graffiti, it started in the East Coast of America, in Philadelphia, moved quickly to New York, but when it transformed and people started painting the outside of trains, that carried the art around the cities. So it actually had a function like Instagram or the internet. It was a way that artists could have their work seen. Now, at the inception of graffiti, the art form and the crime were very tightly coupled. So, you know, if you're painting on the outside of the train, it may be artistic, but it's also got the criminal element associated with it. Now, in the sort of 50 years since, there's been some enormous changes. So technology has changed a lot. Most of the street art we see today is actually online and probably not on the streets. It tumbles through our news feeds. We all have cameras, we all record it, and we tend to share it a lot. So it doesn't really matter necessarily where you paint now, because that photograph can travel around the world on the internet very quickly. There's been a proliferation of styles, techniques, and aesthetic ideals as well, and I'm going to show you some beautiful photos of that too. What's also happened is the separation of the art form and the crime. Now, they all still exist, but it's possible, and there's more opportunities today for the art form to be realized without the crime element. And it's that art form that we celebrate. And then I'll talk you through these external trends. So graffiti itself, an aesthetic of graffiti, which is writing your name, letters, has changed enormously. And today the art is beautiful. It's technical, it's skillful, it's extremely colorful. An amazing art form in itself. This is a piece from a Russian artist called Weiss. So the graffiti itself, visually, has changed. Street art came out of graffiti. There's a different movement. And there's an enormous number of techniques that can be used today. A lot of us are aware of stencils. I was counting and waiting for that one. But any technique is acceptable. This is by a New York-based artist, Akash Nihalani. Any technique is acceptable. In fact, you could even go to the kitchen, press a sieve against your face, put it in shadow, in city lighting, and you'll have an effect like this. So the techniques have been blown wide open. The skill is really there, but what artists are able to use is far broader than it's been at any time in history. And those techniques run from the very durable, using things like tiles and drilling into walls, to the very ephemeral, using things like string or painting on cling film. Street art, as a term, is a catch-all word. It encompasses a lot of different kinds of aesthetic, but we call it all street art because it's just, the thing it has in common is that it happens to be painted outside. And I want to show you some of those aesthetic trends. The first one, past masters. So there's lots of artists today reinterpreting past masters. These pieces are based on Alphonse Mouchet and Arsène Boldo, and they're by artist Pau from Italy and Inky from the UK. A second aesthetic trend, 3D. There's artists, even though this piece is flat, it looks like it's bursting off the wall. This piece too, it's a flat piece at an abandoned theater in Venice. It's a stunning piece, and it looks extremely kind of like it's coming off the wall. Now, that 3D leads us into another aesthetic trend, illusion. This piece is painted on a corner. It's in a rough neighborhood outside of Lisbon. It's a stunning piece. It's kind of difficult to get your head around all of the things that are going on. Likewise with this piece. This is actually painted on cling film. So it's a combination of some really high, clever illusion, but also very clever materials as well. So we're calling all of this stuff street art, but it's really broad. Of course, I mentioned technology's had an impact. Well, if you can take photographs, you can record how a piece changes over time. So it's another illusionary piece, and it's a before and an after that makes a really powerful statement. Another aesthetic trend, photorealism. There's artists that are capable of painting very highly realistic pieces, and they're really stunning. Some are quite funny, and some of them have got an amazing context. This is painted in an abandoned door factory, and it's clearly based on the doors of perception. And context is something we'll talk about in a second. Font-based work, another aesthetic trend. Some graffiti, when I show people graffiti, it's hard to read. It's difficult, it's challenging. There's a kind of return to this sign writing aesthetic of the 1950s that some artists are bringing back. Calligraphy, Arabic. You don't have to just work in English. All of these things are now becoming possible, and even abstraction. So street art, aesthetically, is very broad. It also has a form of innovation, we'll call it spatial innovation, where it's really sensitive to the kind of space. You can do fun things. So this is based on obviously working with the plants, but it's by an Italian artist, Mr. Toms, and he's giving himself a haircut. Now, similarly, street art, again, can be sensitive to context, as this piece shows, working with your environment. Irregular shaped walls. You don't have to think about just flat walls. Street art works in the city. It works with whatever it is that, it works with the space as it finds it, right? Bridges, cars. There's nothing that can't be painted now. Roads as well. And street art teaches you to look at your city in a slightly different way. I mean, shadows always fall in the same place in a city. So if you start to look at your city differently because of how street art teaches you to do that, you can end up with very cool things like this. So that was trend one. So what's happened in street art? It's gotten a lot broader visually, and it's sensitive. It's working with the space, and the techniques are much broader. Now, there's been some shifts in advertising over the last few years where hand-painted advertising has got a sort of an increasing role. Now, hand-painted advertising isn't the same as street art, but it's pretty powerful stuff, and it can look a lot better than billboards. Why paint things by hand? So the first thing is it's great to watch. It's experiential. People want to stop and look. It looks better. The product's really amazing. And then it also facilitates digital content, stuff that can be shared on social media. And the question, I'll show you some examples. There's a question at the bottom of this. It's like, could advertising, out-of-home advertising, directly enrich public space? That would be a powerful thing if it could do that. This is a mural we painted 3 weeks ago. It's a branded mural for a co-working space in East London. It's 80 meters long. And the theme was based on disrupted inventors. So very highly artistic. That's Alan Turing on the right, who was mentioned yesterday, and Faraday on the left. And the idea to make this relevant to the brand was to take these portraits of inventors and smash them up, disrupt them a little bit. So the point I'm making is that we think this is an enrichment of public space. I'll skip that one a little bit and just go to this one. So this was the most recent job that we've done. This was for Dulux, and it just kind of makes sense that a paint company would support painted murals. So again, it's this notion that through, not street art, but the techniques of this idea that hand-painted advertising could enrich public space. And it's the last thing, well, the third trend that I want to talk about, which I think is probably the most powerful, is what's happening to our public spaces. So the beauty of street art is that it sees a city not for how it is, but for how it could be. So it works with spaces. Let me skip that one. Hold on. Excuse me. So there's been an increasing organization around the street art community. So one of the main trends that's happened in the last sort of 5 or 10 years is street art festivals. 10 years ago, there were no street art festivals. And they've been cropping up all the time, and now loads of cities in the UK have them, but this is happening all over the world. When an architect thinks about regeneration, you might be tempted to knock a building down and start again. Now, street art is a very powerful way for shifting public perceptions of an area, and it's a lower cost way of doing that because it works with what's already in the space. So I'll show you some examples of festivals as they're happening in the UK. This is a ship in Wales that hasn't been sailing for some 20 years. Now, as a ship, it's functionless, but as a canvas for art, it's beautiful. This is in Bristol, another street art festival called See No Evil. In Wales, these are some of our projects, some of the walls that we've organized in the last few years. And then other festivals in the UK, including Birmingham, Chichester, and Gloucester. Okay, so we did something that was quite interesting a few weeks ago, and this is really where it's at today. This is what's being figured out. So we held a competition with a London-based blog, nominate your neighborhood for a street art festival. And there's this demand, this latent demand where people want it, but they're not sure necessarily how to have it. So 7 neighborhoods came forward, including Brockley, and after a few thousand votes, Brockley won that sort of street art festival. What we're looking to do today is figure out how's this stuff, it's becoming more sustainable, and it's got access to different levels of funding. So through public funds, crowdfunding, developers, brands, media, lots of people are getting involved in this. Okay, so I've whizzed through quite a little bit. So the points that I wanted to make, and I hope you take these away with you today, that firstly, street art, technically and aesthetically, is broader and better than we probably realized. In terms of enriching public space, hand-painted advertising offers alternatives that can help enrich public space. And then the last point then is this increasing number of street art festivals. All around the world, these things are happening. And that leads me to this conclusion, that our cities are becoming more painted, and I hope you guys get to share in that vision. Thank you.